Okay. Gavel. Okay, welcome everybody to the Special Audit Committee meeting on Tuesday, March 26, 2024 at 1 p.m. Before we get started, I would like to ask the interpreter to introduce themselves and walk through how to access our interpretation services for today's meeting. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon. Announcement from the interpreter. To use the interpretation feature, please scroll to the bottom of the Zoom screen where the meeting controls are. Click on the interpretation icon, the world, and select English as your language. If you're joining through the Zoom mobile app from a cell phone, tablet, etc., please press the ellipsis, then interpretation, and then choose your language. Finally, click on mute original audio to not hear the original Spanish low in the background. Headsets are available for interpretation. If you're in the meeting room, please check our headset from the receptionist in the lobby. Buenas tardes, aviso por parte del intérprete. Para hacer uso del servicio de interpretación, favor de desplazarse a la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom, donde aparecen los controles. Haga clic en el icono de interpretación, donde está el globo terráqueo, y seleccione español. Si está utilizando la aplicación de Zoom desde su celular, tableta, etc., presione los puntos suspensivos, luego interpretación y luego el idioma. Si no desea escuchar el audio original en inglés en el fondo, por favor seleccione Mute Original Audio o silenciar audio original. Contamos con auriculares disponibles para el servicio de interpretación. Si se encuentra en la sala de la reunión, por favor pedir auriculares con la recepcionista en el vestíbulo. Gracias. Thank you.
Thank you. Tessa, can you confirm we have a quorum?
Thank you, Chair. We do have a quorum with one public member absent.
Thank you. With that, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, God, indivisible, with liberty and justice. Okay, then as we move into the meat of the agenda, I just wanted to make a couple comments. First, I'd like to thank everybody for making the special meeting, both the members and the staff. It's very helpful and shows that we're all very serious and diligent about doing our work here. Second, in order to make sure that the appropriate amount of effort is expended for the special meeting topics and that we can get through the meeting on time, this is how I intend to allow for public comment on each one of the agenda items. So number one, the non-agenda public comment will be 2 minutes. Number 2 and 3 as light topics will be 1 minute. Number 4 will be 2 minutes. And then for the main item of today, I want to give full public input. And so that'll be 3 minutes, which is the actual auditor's report will be 3 minutes per public speaker. So that's what I intend to do. With that, can we move on to start with item number 1, the non-agenda public comments?
Thank you, Chair. I have one speaker on this item, the original draw. Please go ahead.
I wanted to say thank you for allowing more time to the public. So you know who's ultimately responsible for oversight of management? It's the board of directors. The audit committee is responsible for advising the board, especially the public members. The report is very telling why they're not holding the CFO accountable for not doing his job. We already knew this, but we now see proof that he was aware of these things and the issues and still did nothing to take meaningful action or inform the board. Lack of supervision, lack of adequate controls, lack of oversight. Andre has complete responsibility for all of this. He continues to sweep it all under the rug. The report even goes into specific examples of Andre lying to the board after Lauren made the issue public. Not material, all been fixed. The auditors knew it from the beginning and they were fine with it. Andre has ripped off the taxpayers for years now, and now it's costing taxpayers another $30 million for Andre's mistakes to replace the system. Andre feared for his job if all was discovered. So what does he have? What does he do to save himself? He fires the director that was threatened to out these issues to the auditors. How is that not criminal? I mean, I don't understand why SANDAG is tolerating this. How has Andre not been held accountable? If he had any dignity left, he would resign immediately and publicly apologize to the taxpayers of San Diego. Own your mistakes, Andre. You should have resigned months ago to save yourself the public embarrassment. And if he doesn't resign out of shame, SANDAG needs to terminate him for lack of performance, unethical behavior, and complete incompetence. So I'm glad that you guys are having this meeting. It's important to be transparent with the people. So I hope that as this continues to come out, the idea would to be moving forward and be transparent from inception and at all times with the public, because if not, then the public loses faith and hope in SANDAG. They've already lost it in the CFO, Andre. So we need to.
And your time expired. And I do apologize, Chair. I have one more public speaker on this item. Phone number 731, please go ahead.
Thank you. You had one more caller because I just had to call in to mess with David Zito again, because I do have another meeting I got to go to. But I concur with the last statement. But has SANDAG ever been transparent? I don't think so. Anyways, my fun this time is letting everyone know that David decided to ditch everyone at the retreat after party because he supposedly had better things to do. However, I believe he was actually had the leave to go celebrate Women's Pizza Month, and I am, of course, in full approval of that. I mean, there's only 5 days left to celebrate, but you did miss out on a good time. Anyways, I want to thank all who've been working hard and digging deep into the various audit topics, including this meeting. I'm not sure if you guys ever do audits on the quality of information coming from different SANDAG departments, because the city data at the retreat was data-driven deception. Commute times were compared by mode, but not equally compared by distance to give an accurate idea about travel time. Example, by bike was measured at 4 miles, where by transit was measured at 13 miles. Equal distance would show that public transit is almost as slow as riding a bike. So the real data shows what SANDAG pushes. Both options suck when it comes to efficiency. So I'm going to recommend an audit on the data coming from SANDAG, maybe even on whether or not it's been properly evaluated before being presented to the board of directors, or if there's any financial ties that are influencing the outcomes or the measurements. And I would also say look into the cross-border trolley into Mexico idea for the same reasons, because that's a project that would barely benefit America in any way, if at all. So other than tracking people with new biometric requirements, what else is behind that push? And I'm going to say for the record that I did see Andre hanging around at the last meeting. He's got a lot on his plate. So have fun with the rest of the meeting, guys. I will be listening. And thanks for the very fair comment time, David. What a good chair to mess with. Thank you. Have a good day.
And that concludes the public comments.
Thank you. With that, I'd like to note that member Wong Nickerson did join us, and so we have a full house now. And as well, since she was able to join us, I do intend for the reports to swap items 5 and 4. So we will take item 5, the most important topic for today, first, and then after that, presuming we have time, take item 4. With that, we will move on to item number 2, which is update from the independent performance auditor. Courtney.
Thank you, Chair Zito. I'm going to make it very quick today. The update I can give you is that we've been working on this investigation report, so we'll be sharing that today. Thank you.
That's nice and short. Do we have any public comments? Hopefully also nice and short on the auditor's update.
I have one public commenter, the original draw. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that was a short update, but I think it's important that this is being addressed. It's sad that it's, takes things like coming out into the public for things to, for this board or just SANDAG in general to make of an importance of something to mitigate. But I think that we need to be more mindful and have things, not be swept under the rug like they have been for many years now, and to be out and open and transparent with the public so that they can, gain your trust. I mean, if that's what you want from the people is to trust you, then prove it by, not waiting until something happens or letting things be, constantly swept under the rug. and be open and honest, so that people can trust you guys and feel like what you're doing is trying to make sure that the money that they spend isn't just being, you know, thrown away. So yeah.
And that concludes the public comments.
Thank you. With that, we'll move on to the approval of the meeting minutes and consent calendar. Do we have any public speakers on the minutes?
I have one public speaker, the original draw. Please go ahead.
Yeah, just on the minutes, I wanted to mention, like I mentioned at the SANDAG meeting, you know, when you were talking at the previous meeting about not going to investigate, that you weren't going to investigate Lauren's claim because it wasn't going through the whistleblower hotline of OIPA. And so, you know, we shouldn't be doing things like that. We need to be making sure that we are, again, you know, bringing things out into the open and not claiming that because someone didn't go through a certain, you know, protocol that you want them to, that they can't bring forward an item or information that is affecting the people. So I think it's important that, again, we just continue to be as transparent with the people as possible and not be making excuses as to why things aren't being brought out into the open. And punitively punishing people for, you know, not taking certain actions when just all the information that comes out needs to be accepted, no matter how you get it. It shouldn't have to go through a certain protocol to get to.
Thank you. Your time expired. That concludes the public comments.
Are there any member comments on the meeting minutes? See nothing. Thank you. Do I have a second? Motion by Druger. Do I have a second? Second by Member Dorsey. Please vote. That member motion passes unanimously. With that, we'll move on to the reports. As I stated earlier, we're going to take item 5 first. Tessa, can we just do a check to make sure we know how many public speakers we're going to have on this one? Because I would like to allow 3 minutes, but can we get people to raise their hands?
So for the public that are online, if you want to speak on item 5, please raise your hand at this time. I have one hand raised, Chair.
Okay, then we will go with the full 3 minutes on item 5 for public speakers. With that, I also wanted to note that before I hand this over to Courtney, that since this is, to the best of my knowledge, the first investigation report that's come to this body, we usually see audit reports. And since we're doing that and it's a slight change, to ask Courtney to address that, just so we understand what's going on here in the public. It's this update. I think it's a great change. Fully support it and glad she's doing this, but I would want to start with that. With that, turn it over to Courtney.
Thank you so much, Chair Zito, for that. So I am going to start with an education piece on this, and I am going to read a couple definitions because I think it's so important that people understand the difference between a performance audit and an investigation. So a performance audit is an objective analysis so that management and those charged with governance and oversight can use the information to improve program performance and operations, reduce cost, facilitate decision-making by parties with responsibility to oversee or initiate corrective action, and contribute to public accountability. An investigation, on the other hand, involves a detailed examination and analysis of specific incidents, allegations, or suspicions of wrongdoing within an organization. It aims to uncover the truth, gather evidence, and determine the extent of any potential wrongdoing, if there is any. So that gives you the difference. As the chair stated, I know that this is a new procedure for the audit committee, and I have always issued substantiated investigations that are significant to the public interest. And I have based that on California Government Code. Bear with me, we 53087. So for as many years as I have been running a whistleblower hotline, we made the determination that if an investigation was substantiated, if it was in the best public interest, that should be issued in a full investigation report. I believe that we talked about it before. We also issue an annual hotline whistleblower report, and that will have synopsis in it. So if it is, for example, time reporting, someone has, it's time card fraud is what it's called. If that was going on, more than likely that would end up in a synopsis in the annual whistleblower report. When something is as significant as this, SR 125, then we issue a report because there's a lot, as you can see, there's a lot to document, there's a lot to understand, and to have the findings and recommendations, and it's worthy of the public seeing the complete picture as represented by the work we did. So with that, unless there's anything else that anybody would like me to clarify on the process, I will jump into the presentation. So we are here today to discuss OIPA's State Route 125 toll operation report. It was conducted by myself, Courtney Ruby, the independent performance auditor. It was conducted by investigator, whistleblower program manager, Doug DePete, who's a principal independent auditor, and Lloyd Carter did the quality control work on the investigation. So as an introduction, in December 2023, the IPA Audit Committee Board Chair and several board members determined that publicly disclosed allegations of SR 125 toll customer mischarges and accounting issues warranted an independent investigation. Given the impact of SR 125 toll given the impact on SR 125 toll customers and the community at large, it is critical for SANDAG Board of Directors and the public to understand what occurred and how SANDAG management can prevent this from happening in the future. From a historical standpoint, we know that the board was given a briefing in closed session in October due to the significant performance issues of ETAN. In November, the former Director of Accounting and Finance filed a lawsuit, and in December, OIPA launched an investigation. The objectives of the investigation are to determine if SANDAG's SR 125 financial accounting can be relied upon, if SANDAG rectified the publicly reported errors with customer accounts shared with the board in December, and if there are other significant matters that we noticed during the investigation. Our investigation report is divided in 3 sections. Section 1 will go over SR 125 accounting issues. Section 2 will go over the status of publicly reported errors with customer accounts. And Section 3 will go into other significant reportable matters. Section 1 is this is a walkthrough of the subheaders in Section 1. And so what we start out to begin with is first, there was a report that was produced by HNTB for SANDAG that talked about some of the risk in relation to the SR 125 project. And we identify a couple risks that we highlight in there. And what we found was that the mitigation strategies were insufficient. SANDAG's mitigation strategies for those risks were insufficient for what occurred after SR 125 went live. So what we saw is after SR 125 went live, we saw the amount of what we show in the report as work tickets, which are tickets that are submitted by either tolling staff or accounting staff in relation to problems that they were experiencing with the staff. From 22 to 23, those problems doubled. We know that finance staff were having significant concerns with ETAN right off the bat. So to give you a time frame, on June 6, 2022, that is when SR 125 goes live. A month later, the senior accountant is already having issues and noting those in relation to the trial balance. We know that ETAN did not prioritize SANDAG's finance staff's needs. We saw it in notes and emails and in conversations and interviews that we had. And this is also supported in the report with an email in there that is from March 2023 of ETAN's staff asking the senior accountant some basic financial reports that would be needed and reconciliations, information in order that the finance staff would need to have to be successful. This was 9 months after SR 125 went live. Given the fact that finance could not receive what it needed, it then initiated workarounds to reconcile outside of the system. So what that looked like was reconciling by using the bank statements and the credit card statements because they couldn't rely on the information in the system. Typically, you would be able to look at your accounting records, look at your bank statements or merchant records, and you would reconcile those. However, they utilized this to provide the revenue, to reconcile the revenue for cash and credit. In June of 2023, HNTB, as part of their contract, was to validate ETAN's back office system reports. So ETAN ran reports for HNTB to validate. HNTB found that the majority of those reports failed or they were not able to run them. So that gives you a sense, just based on those bullet points that I've covered so far, that the system wasn't working. Accounting wasn't being prioritized, and the reports that accounting needed were not coming out. We also note in there that the ETAN's reporting system was inconsistent and balances could not always be relied upon. One of the examples is that the beginning trial balance for 1 year is off. It does not match the ending balance of the year before. So typically what we know is that when you close your books for a year end, your numbers are locked in, and those ending numbers from one fiscal year become the beginning numbers for the next fiscal year. And one of the errors we note was $150,000 off. We know that ETAN's control environment over SR 125 financial reporting was insufficient to ensure reliable reporting, and I'll go through that in more detail. We talk about materiality versus accuracy, and then we talk about other issues. So the findings in this section are that ETAN's fast lane financial reporting cannot be relied upon, and that SANDAG's financial department lacks adequate internal controls, including proper review and supervision to ensure SR 125 financial information is accurately recorded, accounted for, and reported accurately. When we talk about SANDAG's control environment, and this is meaning the Department of Finance, these are some of the issues that we noted in the report. Unearned revenue is only reconciled at year end for the year end financial statements. Unearned revenue should be reconciled either monthly or quarterly. Financial statements are produced quarterly or annually to satisfy annual audit or quarterly bond reporting versus on a monthly basis, which would be just to ensure that your information is accurate or complete. You're reporting out to your end users to make sure management has information it needs, and that that's happening at a monthly interval. We found that year-end journal entries were not posted. We were posted without supporting documentation. We requested documentation, and the accountant needed to go back and retrace some of their steps in relation to, in order to provide us with some of that supporting documentation, some of the information. They needed to provide a number that would either true up or true down the balance. So there was gaps in some of the numbers. There's a common fee, revenue, and expense allocation for expenses that are shared between SR 125 and I-15 allocation method. When we asked for documentation on this, they needed to go and investigate that and then bring it back to us, which they did. For accounts receivable, policy does not exist. However, the report notes this is for violation of, and one of the examples in the report is for violation revenue, and that the accountants walked us through this and explained their accrual method to us, and it does appear reasonable. So we're not questioning the reasonableness of the accrual, but we are concerned that there's no policy that is documenting how they treat accounts receivable, their collection process, their write-off process. And the accountant that we were working with did say that they are going to address that. For daily monitoring of trips from the CAPS roadside center system into ETAN's fast lane BOS system is not being done. And this is key because there is a roadside system which collects the data, and it takes the data of the trips that are going on the roadway, grabs it, it calculates and assesses the toll to it, and then it transmits it over to the BOS. So that's a good way to ensure the accuracy of what's coming in on the roadway actually ends up in the BOS system and then gets translated into the financial information. So materiality versus accuracy. At times during the discussion of accounting issues, it has been talked about that the issues are not material. So we really wanted to address this to make sure that the public and the board and the audit committee are clear that materiality is a generally accepted accounting principle that determines whether misstatements in financial reporting, such as an omission or misstatement, would impact a reasonable user's decision-making. This is not a principle that is used in preparation of an organization's audited financial statements. Materiality, however, with your accounting records, every transaction should be entered and it should be entered to the penny. We put an example that's a hypothetical in the report. For example, if you have 50-some million dollars in revenue, you may have $100,000 misstatement in the financial statements, and the financial statement auditors may deem that to be immaterial because it would not impact a user's decision-making if they were relying on those statements. However, if we had a $500 hotel reimbursement, we chose not to put it in the books. We could not reconcile our books. So there is a difference. Your financial statements, your financial system has to enter all information to the penny accurately. Materiality is a concept for financial statement preparation. Other issues in this section include customer account balance summary report. It took a long time for ETAN to produce this report. They didn't produce it until July of 2023. Again, just to remind you, SR 125 went live on June 6th. The customer account balance summary report is something that ties back into deferred revenue. When we talk about deferred revenue, that means if I'm a fast track user and I have a balance on my fast track account of $50, that is my prepaid balance. And to SANDAG, that is the deferred revenue. So this is a report that should be able to reconcile with the general ledger system in the BOS, the back office system from ETAN, and also in SANDAG's QuickBooks. ETAN's system posted incorrect data, and we'll talk more about that in section 2 of the report. We heard this from numerous staff people, in addition to even one of ETAN staff members, that ETAN would fix one problem and another problem would be created. Just gives you an eye into the instability of the system. Lack of documentation. This is covered in several places in the report. It lacks system documentation, and ETAN had high personnel turnover on this job. So people would come on board. The system documentation was lacking or inconsistent, and they couldn't figure out how to fix things because it wasn't there to figure out the path backwards. So the conclusion for the first section of the report is the investigation found that the financial information in the ETAN Fastlane BOS cannot be relied upon, and that the SANDAG executive management was aware of the system's inability to produce reliable financial reports. Additionally, the finance department lacks sufficient internal controls, including proper supervision and timely reconciliation. Senior financial management allowed the situation to persist and did not intercede at an operational level to ensure the reliability of the financial information. Instead, they dismissed the concerns as not material. Our recommendation here is we recommend an independent assessment of the finance department's policies and procedures and practices to ensure adequate internal controls, including proper review and supervision over all of SANDAG's financial operations. I just want to take a moment to go over this recommendation. There's two things. First, while the investigation is about SR 125, we saw the issues that we saw from the financial accounting standpoint were concerning enough that we felt it warranted an assessment of the entire finance department's policies, practices, and procedures. An independent assessment of the finance department, it means that SANDAG would hire an independent consultant to come in and review their policies, procedures, and practices from top to bottom. That would really give you an assessment to say, this is what's working, this is not what does not work, and this is what you need to correct that. So you all, as well as the public and the board, can have the confidence that things moving forward are working. This is not something that OIPA would do. This is something that you would hire somebody that day in, day out evaluates accounting departments. While we could do it, it wouldn't be, it would take us away from doing other things. And so we're recommending that a third party provide this assessment. Finding 3. This is section 2, finding 3. For the publicly disclosed customer general ledger errors, none of the underlying software program or configuration issues in ETAN's Fastlane have been fixed. So in December, all these errors were brought forward. It was talked about in the public forum. It was determined that we wanted to go in and return back to you so you knew what has occurred. How has SANDAG fixed those? So this is what section 2 is all about. The key takeaway is that you need to know is that ETAN did not fix the system programming or configuration. So no matter what, the errors will still persist and they will need to be adjusted for either in SANDAG's books for this, which they maintain SR 125 and QuickBooks, or in ETAN's general ledger. We go in detail in this chapter with each type of error, and we tell you then whether it was fixed at a system level, which we've already said it wasn't, and then whether it was fixed in both ETAN's general ledger system as well as SANDAG's QuickBooks. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through these, but I will give you, I will go through by the numbers and then I'll go through one of the slides on the errors. So by the numbers, we know that the CFO reported about 90,000 customer accounts to the board in December, which is, totally on par. We saw 88,000 customer accounts. 48,620 of those accounts had issues in the general ledger. And again, stressing that the errors were in the general ledger, not in the customer account balances, and that 8,800 continue to be researched. In the report, you will see a diagram of the errors by category. This is the only manual fix. We talk about everything else as system, but this was a manual fix that they went in and the programmers fixed. So that's listed in there. This is a system generated error and there's several of those errors in there. But again, to give you an example, the report will tell you how many were affected. In this case, it was 131 accounts. The revenue effect was 52,000, almost 53,000. The Fastlane general ledger fix did not occur, so the general ledger was not fixed in the ETAN system. The QuickBooks entry was fixed in November of 2023. And as we said before, the software system has not been fixed for any of these. So the 8,800 accounts that remained, and this remained in the conversations in December, and those continue to remain being researched at this time. Fagan was hired to do the research and look into it. We did meet with Fagan and went through their analysis. They issued a first analysis in February, and then they just issued a revision to that analysis on March 15th. And these conclusions give you a sense of how difficult it really is to get everyone's hands around these transactions right now. The correctness, the Fagan report concluded in the March 15th report, the correctness of the posted transactions remains to be verified as it was not in the scope of the audit to validate if all tolls, credit card payments, violation fees, et cetera, were correctly populated on customer accounts. They also say while no transaction posting errors were found in the customer accounts, there were several anomalies found regarding BOS GL 2255 entries. And what that translates into is the deferred revenue. What I had said before about the customer account balances, that's what that GL references. So our conclusion in section 2 is the results of this investigation demonstrate many system limitations must be overcome to arrive at a desired level of accuracy, which may or may not be possible. And even if possible, may be cost prohibitive given the level of effort that would need to occur. Section 2, this should have come earlier, so my apologies on that, but there was a talk about 110 errors it was reported in the public incorrectly. talking about a customer being a charge for a non-customer being charged. Okay, let me say, how it was reported in the public in December was if I went through a toll and then I wouldn't get charged, but the person behind me would get charged. So what we found was instead was that if your fast track account was closed, so let's say I moved out to another state, my fast track account, I close it down. SANDAG goes to charge me a toll. And because now they're reconciling their records, they note, oh, I still have a $5 toll out there. They go to reconcile, they go to charge me. Well, I've closed my account. They can't charge my credit card. So they charge somebody else's credit card. Now, the good news about this is SANDAG and ETAN isolated this problem quickly. So, and all refunds that we're aware of, and we're not seeing this pattern occur anymore, have been issued, and that was $3,200. The Section 2 recommendation on this is that we recommend that SANDAG reconcile the data from the CAPS system to the ETAN BOS daily to ensure accurate transmission and posting of the customer account data. So again, we want to know what is hitting the CAPS roadway system, because that's the first time they pick up the data. They calculate it and then they transmit it to BOS. We want to make sure that that's accurate, and we need a daily reconciliation of that. That will help to rebuild confidence and trust in the system. Section 3, finding 4. So if you remember, Section 3 is related to other reportable matters. So the objectives of the investigation were to look at accounting matters. We went through accounting matters. It was also to look at the errors that were publicly reported. We did that. Now we go into the separate third section, which talks about what else did we see while we were out there that's significant that needs to be reported. So the first finding is ETAN's implementation of the back office fast lane was headed for trouble from the beginning. SANDAG's executive management failed to address the situation in a timely manner, including informing the board of directors. This kind of goes over some events that occur to lead up to that finding. So in February 2022, the CFO was assigned oversight responsibility of SR 125. We know prior to that there had been various people in that position, that there was different roles in both executive management as well as the director for a certain time, for over the time period of the project. So at this point, the CFO takes over in February 2022. The CFO contracts Fagan to do a couple reports to assess the situation. And the first report is to look at the back office system RFP. So this is the request for proposal that was issued that ETAN responded to, and that ETAN was then awarded the work to do the SR 125 tolling system. Fagan's summary of findings in just looking at the BOS and RFP noted that there was vague, duplicative, or contradictory requirements in the RFP. There were untestable requirements, questions about the actual evaluation process, and poor system engineering processes applied in developing the RFP. Fagan then goes on to say in their analysis, at the time of the SANDAG RFP, the winning bidder was already experiencing significant financial, schedule, and development issues on at least one other project. Unfortunately, this concern was not discovered or it was dismissed. So I said Fagan did 2 reports. The next report they did was the operational risk assessment. They list in their report many cons with ETAN, and we just called out 4. So one was that ETAN software development staff is limited. It is a possible single point of failure if that person leaves ETAN. That person left within 2 months of when SR 125 went live. ETAN has limited experience in this type of software development. Only 2 operational back office system projects did they have. ETAN seriously misrepresented the amount of development needed to implement SANDAG's system. The RFP compliance matrix indicated 90% of SANDAG's requirements existed in baseline software. So what that means is RFP says, this is what we need. ETAN responds and says, we have that in our baseline system. 90% of what SANDAG needs, we have that. Instead, when the staff were interviewed, it was determined that 90% needed new development. So now you have a system that is not off the shelf. Now you have a system that is basically being built from scratch. And from doing the work on this, we talked about this point at length. And the contact requirements is our understanding, and this will have to be reviewed, were so broad that this was not seen as a contract change, because you would think it would be a contract change, but that is something that perhaps management will want to look more into more. Lastly, much of the project and technical documentation is poorly written, and that is well documented in the report, and the lack of ETAN's understanding of what they were getting into. So the system, going back to Fagan is hired. Fagan in June of 2022 does a briefing in relation to their risk assessment. And after that briefing, this email is sent from the CFO to Ron Fagan, who is the head of Fagan, and says it was really determined that we need to move away from ETAN, in particular for the new Otime Mesa port of entry, but also in time for SR 125 and I-15. So we need to take an item to our board, SANDAG Board of Directors, sooner than later, so we can get the team moving in a direction to prepare a new RFP. The Board of Directors of SANDAG are not notified for 16 months. A sole source justification is brought to them, and the sole source justification notes all the issues going on, but this is presented in January of 2024. ETAN's unable to deliver a BOS in the specifications of the contract. The toll system, which includes customers for both roadways, has experienced ongoing outages, errors in customer accounts, inability to process transactions accurately, and on it goes. The conclusion in this section is the reasons of SANDAG senior management did not address the seriousness of the concerns with ETAN's ability to perform sooner is not a part of this investigation, but it is a matter that should be reviewed in detail by SANDAG senior management with the Board of Directors to ensure matters of this magnitude are handled expeditiously and with accountability and transparency at the forefront. Such matters should be presented to the Board of Directors and the public in a timely manner. The recommendations for this finding are all directed to the board. First, we recommend that the board and public should be provided with an explanation as to why an RFP process was not initiated a year sooner and why the board was instead presented with a request to, a request to authorize a sole source contract award on January 12th, 2024. The board should consider a policy that requires a board report when a multi-million-dollar project like this is failing to meet its deadlines and its deliverables, and that the board should determine under what criteria that should happen, when it should start, and when it should end. The board should review SANDAG's sole source awards semi-annually to ensure adherence with the public procurement laws and practices. And lastly, that the board request the audit committee to include in my work plan next year, the IPA's work plan, a assessment of the sole source procurement process. Finding 5 in section 3 is about revenue loss. So the finding is that SANDAG has suffered significant revenue loss due to a lack of adequate and timely monitoring, in addition to the CAPS not transmitting the data. So they either did not transmit the data to the BOS system, or they transmitted incorrectly calculated data. So our conclusion in here, and that amounts to almost $2 million. The conclusion was that SANDAG has sustained significant losses due to the lack of the timely monitoring, and even with the knowledge of such losses, a comprehensive monitoring system was not implemented. So to curb leakage, we're recommending that SANDAG carefully monitor the toll operations daily to identify and address the system issues. And the recommendation basically says, and that's what it says. So I won't read that. For section 6, this is a different matter. This is, well, I want to go back for 1 second just to make clear. So revenue loss means it never came in. It never hit the books. So this isn't something that was recorded and then disappeared. I just want to make sure everybody understands that, including the public. It never made it to the books. And again, just saying, CAPTCH could have failed to transmit it to the BOS system. If it didn't hit the BOS system, it wouldn't have got recorded. The next finding was at least $1 million in revenue has been lost due to a function in ETAN's BOS not being turned on. So this is about missing DMV hold functionality. Well, what is that? So DMV hold functionality means if you are out on the toll system, you go through a toll and you don't have a transponder, or your transponder is not working, or you get a bill and you don't pay it. So you don't pay your toll, you then get a violation. That violation then escalates if you don't pay it, and it continues to escalate and build. SANDAG reports through this. If the system is, the hold functionality is turned on, then the DMV gets a record of all that, and they put a hold on your registration. So you go to register your car and they say, no, you cannot register your car until you clear these violations. That did not, the hold in functionality in the ETAN system was not turned on. So, and what we know is that Deloitte and A to B, who are going to now, the tolling system is transitioning to, that they are stating that this is going to happen in phase 2. And what our recommendation is to see if it can possibly be implemented sooner, because you're losing revenue. The you in that statement being SANDAG. Finding 7, and this is the last finding. So this was something that Doug DePete, our investigator on this investigation, found. So in looking at a subset of accounts that were tested, the beginning fast lane customer account balances no longer match the original balance brought over for the legacy system. So again, just to take you back in time, prior to June 6, 2022, the tolling system was operating on a legacy system. The team at SANDAG and HNTB tested those ending balances. They tested whether they carried over from the legacy system and whether those ending balances were now the beginning balances of the ETAN system. And they were, and they are no longer. So we don't know why. We gave this to management a couple weeks ago. It may even be a month now. It's hard to keep track of time. And they are reviewing that to figure out what happened. So the conclusion on this is that we know that great care must be taken to address customer account balances so that confidence can be restored with SANDAG's customers, the board, and the public. And the recommendation on this, and as I already stated, management is investigating this. And the recommendation for this particular finding is, first, we recommend that SANDAG implement the daily reconciliation process, which we already, that was a previous recommendation. Make sure that the CAPTCH roadway system is being reconciled to the BOS system. And the last recommendation in the investigation report is that SANDAG establish a process to address customer concerns related to past account balances that have not been verified or that are not able to be verified. In addition, if additional discrepancies in customer account balances are identified, these accounts should be included in this process as well. And that concludes the report briefing.
Thank you. Very thorough and detailed. Appreciate it. I think we will start with public comment. Tessa, can you call any public commenters?
Thank you. We have one comment to the original draw. Please go ahead.
How sad is that, right? One person out of 3.38 million people that actually cares about stuff going on in their community. But, you know, leadership and supervision of financial department and internal controls, that is Andre's job. And, you know, most everything wasn't fixed. He's not been honest or transparent about that. In fact, he was even in Chula Vista talking about how everything was fixed and the mayor had to call him out on it. by saying that it actually wasn't, and he was lying to the people. So I'm just wondering, isn't ethical behavior an important in a CFO for an over $1.3 billion agency? You know, Andrew seems to have been given a cheat sheet from Fagan on how to move forward, and he ignored that too. And, you know, SANDAG has experienced additional significant losses because of Andrew failing to follow the direction and go to the board with a new RFP. I mean, he seems to be a very expensive employee and he has abused his power. And it's sad to think that all of these things could have been mitigated from inception. It seems that it has been known from, you know, the beginning of this coming forward, the SR 125 to be used, that there's been issues, you know, from the get-go. And it shouldn't have taken a whistleblower to, you know, actually bring this forward when we have all of this information that is showing all of the corruption and just hiding that has been taking place, and trying to, you know, continue with companies or entities that are, you know, mismanaging every part of their job. And when, you know, this comes out, it's like, there's no way that no one in SANDAG didn't know this. I mean, the higher echelons of SANDAG, like even a chair person, and different people in SANDAG definitely know about this and have been hiding it. And it would seem to me that that would lead to then protecting of certain people. And that's what's not good, is that we shouldn't be protecting people for doing work that is not what they were set there to do, unless their intention was to make sure that it wasn't done. But, you know, it's kind of, you know, scary to think about how much, you know, hiding has been going on. And it doesn't just happen on one level, it happens on many levels. And when we're being told that these items or issues are being fixed and they aren't, you know, that's a severe problem. And we need to be looking into who's doing that. And so, I mean, if we have a CFO that is sitting here and causing a lot of these problems and trying to hide them still, then he either needs to resign or be fired, because it's ridiculous that it's been, you know, so long that this has been happening. And we're just now trying to like mitigate it when it could have been happened before, especially with like not wanting to wait 30 months to make sure that this was, you know, set out and done in the correct manner. So we need to cure and correct it.
Your time expired. That concludes the public comments.
Thanks. So now we'll move on to member questions and or comments. I will just state, I think it's probably clear, just, you know, as you have questions or comments, that unlike the audits, normally with our audits, management sees them, they get time to respond, they formulate their responses and are come prepared. You know, just like all of us, management didn't see the investigation report till yesterday. So as we formulate our questions, just be aware that that's going to be the context that they may come from if you ask questions of management with that. Does anybody care to start with any questions or comments? Yes, Ms. Pickney Forrest.
So I do have a few questions that are more contract procurement related, more IT related. And I do understand that you may or may not have answers to those questions, but I do think it's relevant to sort of note the observations. So first question being, based on the ETAN contract, were there any clauses that provided for any remedies of non-performance, especially given the fact that there was, you know, a substantial amount of revenue loss, as well as a substantial loss of operational efficiency, given what the system was promising to fulfill? So I'll start there.
I'm going to ask Amberlynn Deaton from General Counsel to respond, please.
Certainly. So the ETAN contract does have comprehensive provisions that are related to, you know, breach of contract, remedies in the event of breach. Those range from liquidated damages, which represent the cost to the agency attributable to delay in delivery of the project, as well as damages that are available to the agency for deficiencies in the system.
So then part two of that question, of my question or observation, either way, would be, was there anyone in SANDAG's, you know, procurement related operations that was actually monitoring the ETAN contract somewhat in real time, so to speak, or at least periodically, to have caught some of the lacks in performance in order to have actually enforced some of those provisions in the contract regarding performance deficiency.
Yes. So, first of all, I think just to provide a little bit of management context here would be if you'll indulge me for just a minute here. So first of all, I really want to thank OIPA for the detailed, clear report. It's very clear what the recommendations are and the findings are, and we truly appreciate that. Again, this is different being an investigation compared to an audit. We really appreciate the fact that you took time out of your busy day yesterday after posting this to brief me and to brief Ray on all the contents, and that was extremely, extremely helpful. In terms of process, we have 2 weeks to prepare a management response, so we are in the process of doing that right now. There are things that I can tell you that are already underway that we're working on. So these recommendations are very consistent with things that we know need to be addressed. The board of directors has scheduled a special meeting for this Friday, and that is specifically to look at the recommendations to the board that then would be recommendations to staff to do certain things. So that meeting agenda has been posted, and I anticipate that the board will take some sort of action, asking staff then to follow up on hiring a consultant to do certain things. And so that all is in the works here with us. So I just want to make sure that that's super clear. I don't know if we're at a stage here today, and I've been in this role as of January 16th, when I was appointed as the interim well, it actually started January 16th, but when I was, my contract was approved in December, the chair looked at me and said, your number one priority is to figure out how to fix State Route 125. This, along with how do we pay it off and how we deal with customer issues. So that I do take very seriously. And I guess the last thing I wanted to just share with the group here is that in my role as Deputy CEO, I became aware that ETAN couldn't perform what we were asking them to perform in October. We had a meeting with the board to notify them of that. And immediately after that, that became a priority for the agency to work on this. So I guess the commitment I'm making here to you all is that following up on all of this is extremely, extremely important. So we may or may not be able to answer questions about who was responsible, should the contracts administrator, we have project managers involved. And I want to say that very respectfully here to the members. Those may be things that we need to bring back to you. We can tell you what was in the contract, what some of the remedies were, but I just want, I guess I need some time as the interim CEO here to digest all of this, see what this means to the agency, respond to what the board of directors is asking us to do as well. But we certainly invite your questions. We may not be able to answer all of them today, but we appreciate those. And if there are things that we can come back to, I would love that opportunity as well. So
Great, thanks for that.
thank you for indulging me
Yeah,
just a
thanks for that
moment.
clarification. Yeah, then relative to the question that member Pickney Forrest was asking, though, my recollection from previous presentations to the board on this very topic, there was a discussion that there was acknowledgement that there was lack of performance in the contract and that liquidated damages were already accruing. Is that correct? And if, Amberlyn, if that's correct, and that's partially answers your question, clearly we knew that not all performance was being done.
Yes, liquidated damages continue to accrue right now. So that is something that we are closely monitoring.
And part of my reasoning for that line of questioning is because it appears as though there was some necessary contract oversight that could be improved based on what we were seeing, the timeliness of any of the responses. And so the tie-in to that is, I think it's recommendation number 6, with OIPA asking the audit committee and the IPA to add a sole source procurement process audit to the audit plan. That is something that I would support because that is something that I was going to recommend had I not seen that recommendation. So that's kind of the line of thinking from my questioning there. My last question, again, you may not have context or any answers for it, but it relates to the IT systems process itself, and it relates to whether or not SANDAG actually has an IT committee or a steering committee or a group or a process that's related to systems development life cycles, configuration management, change management, because it seems as though those, if that system or process or committee were in place, it may have been clearer sooner that this particular system was not going to meet the needs of SANDAG, and/or as you were going through the process of implementing, you would have been able to see, whether there should have been a parallel route, if there should have been a rollout by module, things of that sort. So again, I understand there may not be any answers to that, but my line of thinking is process and sort of taking one step back to sort of say, was there something or a group or a body in place specific to IT software decisions?
Thank you for the, this is Ray Major, Chief Deputy. This project has been going on since 2016, just for context. A couple of years ago, so 2 years ago, we formally launched a project management office where we started to work with more formalized project managers who have certifications in project management to run our implementation of software systems. And we started that on the SANDAG side. The toll operations and the SPX or the 125 was not part of that group at the time that we started this. A couple of the projects that we first started within the PMO include our website and also the ERP, the Enterprise Resource Planning tool that we have internally. And both of those have project management with steering committees of executive management and also all different departments that would be involved in that. And then we have formalized project management on top of that. This particular project did not have that during the implementation of the system. We do monitor it now as if it was this is a huge high priority within the agency, but to answer your question, this was not part of the way that we used to do implementation of software systems. So in this particular case, we outsourced the implementation of the 125, both the CAPTCH and the ETN system, to a contractor to basically act as our representative. We did have a project manager on it who was really more of a person who kind of gave us updates on timelines. So like what was like when things were due and where we were with it. But we've undertaken, we're moving that in-house. We're trying to do that. This is a very large project that we're implementing. With the replacement, with the Deloitte A to B replacement, we have that under the same formalized project management system that we used for the ERP system, where we have a dedicated project manager. Actually, we have two for that product, and we have steering committee, and we're moving forward right now with the requirements gathering phase of the replacement.
Thank you, because that was part two of my question, if that system was going to be moved regarding or used regarding Deloitte and A to B, because otherwise we'd be sitting here having the same conversation some months from now. But that concludes my questions.
Great, thank you. Other questions or yes, Ms. Wong-Nickerson.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say, OIPA, you guys did a really amazing job in very short period of time to look into this investigation. And I agree the report is very clear. Recommendations very, good, very succinct. So I agree with all your recommendations. I have actually a couple comments and questions. And, to me that it seems like this project has some element of, what a good process should be, right? It did go through an RFP process, but somehow it didn't pick the right vendor. Andre hired Fagan that, came and assessed the situation when they noticed their problem, but tech consulting work didn't yield what's needed. I'm a bit worried, that now we have a sole source vendor, very aggressive timeline in 7 months. They need to deliver something that E10, couldn't deliver in 4.5 years. What I'm really interested in is to, hear Colleen and Ray, after you have a chance to digest the information and come back and help us understand what was missing in the process that have the right key components, but somehow still didn't work, right? How do we get assurance that this won't happen again in the future? I think that's really all we all want to know. So that's my comments, number one. Second one is still a little bit unclear to me. I understand the difference between the issues are more on the financial accounting, the general ledger side, that we couldn't really rely on it. And then we can rely on the external auditors to come and can they give a clean report on the financial statements or not, right? That's their job and we rely on them. The piece that is less clear to me is the customer accounts. If I'm reading the report right, there are not too many issues about overcharging customer. In fact, we probably undercharged them because there's $2 million lost revenue. That's the impression that I got. But also, I guess it was a little bit disturbing that Fagan's report didn't comment on how accurate those transactions posted to the customer's account. So it seems like there's no clear opinion on it, but based on what we can see, it seems like we don't, very few overcharging, a lot more undercharging. It would be good to have some clarity on that piece. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the question. And we were very clear our intention was to be very clear because this deals with customers. So I think that part where it was stated early on that this is a general ledger issue, we wanted to make sure that we looked at that based on what we saw. We agree it's a general ledger issue. So we're not saying that this is occurring in the customer account balances. So, and I'll just take a minute for the public, is that when these transactions come in from the CAPS to the BOS, there's a transaction history report. So if I'm a customer, every time I go across a toll, it's going to report that and it's going to take it out of my balance. So that transaction history, that when you hear us talk about the CABS report, the customer account balance summary, it's taking all that history and then it summarizes it into that CABS report. So the information from the CABS report to the GL, that's where the error occurred. It was in that transmission. So we are, and we say this, I don't know exactly the reference, but that it is the general ledger that is the issue, not the customer account balances. So we agree with that. We do say, given all the concerns with the system, we can't say with 100% accuracy. I don't think anybody at this dais can say that there aren't issues. So we looked at the errors that were reported out. We see that that's a general ledger issue. But while we're looking at that, we then find an issue with the customer account balances because of the instability of the platform. That's the part where there's not a comfort level to say, yes, everything's been fixed.
Can I come in?
Sure, you can follow up with that, Ray.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a note that one of the things that the 125 team is looking at right now is how these customer records are being processed. Part of the reason that Fagan had such a problem doing this is that there's no documentation of the software system, and it's very difficult to be able to trace how those transactions move through all of the different ledgers and accounts that are within the system itself. And so what they've been doing right now is to look at a sample of customers. They're actually looking at a statistically significant sample to take customer records and to trace each transaction through. There's 28 million transactions that occurred during this time period. And we're looking at those to see whether or not they're being mischarged or what's happening to it. And so of the ones that we've done so far, and this is a very manual process, we've found that the vast majority, over 90%, in the high 90s, are not being mischarged, as the independent auditor said. The CAP system captures when you get on the toll road and when you get off the toll road, and then it creates a charge, and that is correct. Where we have found the problems is in the ancillary charges, things like, for instance, a monthly maintenance fee that you may be paying if you're not using the toll road enough. It charges you additional monies, and it seems that it's in these exceptions to the general rule where we're starting to find these problems. So that team is going to continue to look at customer records of different types to try to find types of errors or problems so that we can go in and then correct those in bulk where we can find them. Just so you know, we have about 7 people working on this full time, and probably another 5 or 6 who've been working on this part time. And so this is a big group of people who are working on this, and we're focused on customer service. And so we've increased the number of customer service reps that we have by about 40%. And so our call wait times, which used to be a problem, they were about 13.5 minutes on average, are now down to less than 90 seconds. Many people are going to get, if they call, we're going to pick the phone up immediately. And so we're hiring additional customer service reps. We want to make sure that we can, that if anyone has any type of problem, that they're able to call in and they can get help. All of our customer service, we hired a new manager for that department too. And all of our customer service reps know that the customer service is the first priority. And that's what we're doing, is working with them. So if any customer has a problem and they call, we will work with them and check every one of the trips that they've taken, make sure that they're being charged appropriately. So those are some of the things that are occurring right now as we speak at the Toll Operations Center.
Just to build on the first question, how do we make sure this doesn't happen again? So we're already putting things in place because we don't want this to happen again. And one of the things we did is that Ray Major moved into the role as chief deputy, overseeing the software part of this. He has many years in the private sector in software development. So a true asset now overseeing this transition. So that's one of the things. And then Ray has been working with the director of operations, Lucinda Bouchard, who you may have had an opportunity to meet, but to really focus in on those customer accounts. There might be something from an accounting perspective that's considered immaterial, but every penny matters to the person who's using the toll road. And also making sure that we're collecting so that we're able to pay back our loan. Those are critical aspects of accountability. And so that's where we're focused right now. And again, why we appreciate there are things that we can do to strengthen, because we don't want this to happen again.
Yeah, appreciate that. And then just to close on it, and I think it's important to do so and summarize, or at least since this is one of the things that was expressed as a key concern by the public when this first came up. I mean, from what the auditor's office found, there are some areas where there are customer issues found, specifically with the initial account balances, which is continued to be looked into, with being incorrectly charged when another account was closed. And I believe that one was already addressed. So that one's already, we think it's closed. And so then with respect to known issues, the item you just brought up, Ms. Wong-Nickerson, is not known issue, but staff is digging into it. So we will know more, and we are going to address those issues. And I think it might be appropriate when we get to the time at the end, just saying the audit committee supports this work and would like to see it continue to resolution, since it's not one of the findings or recommendations, that we can make a statement saying we would like to make sure that work continues and concludes. But then otherwise, from an auditor perspective, you're concerned about the risk, but there are known issues at this point that we need to pursue outside of the ones that I recognized. Does that sound correct for possible customer overcharging?
It does, Chair. Can you
Thank you.
just, the last sentence, can you restate that? The conclusion, the known errors that were.
Okay, we just expect known issues of possible customer overcharging. They're being addressed or looked into.
The new ones that we found.
The new ones that you found, yes.
New ones, yes.
Yes. But there aren't other ones out there that we haven't brought up.
They're correct.
And
Correct.
by and large, unfortunately, SANDAG's been hurting itself because it seems like the very significant issues are not charging in certain instances. Okay, thanks. I just want to make sure we're crisp and clear on that. With that, Ms. Wong-Nickerson, back to you.
Yeah, just one more thing that I think would be great if we can invite Colleen and Ray come back, after they have a chance to look at the report and give their management comments, so we can close the loop and have a good understanding of what happened.
Great, thanks. Any other member questions or comments? David, go ahead.
So really appreciate the report and the thoroughness of it and the quickness. You seem to have uncovered any difficulties and any problems, and I really appreciate that. And I would, also like the audit committee to, endorse this, and so that it can be moved on appropriately to the board of directors and staff. There is one change. Well, this isn't a change based on the audit, but investigation, sorry. There's one recommendation. The board should consider a policy that requires board report when multi-million-dollar project is failing to meet its deadlines. And that's correct for this investigation. But I would like to see the staff have more of a formal policy to bring back reports on any multi-million-dollar project, whether it's failing or not, because the board should be informed of that. It may be a consent item, but at least there's a formal report coming to the board on any major project, software specifically, because those seem to fall through the cracks pretty easily. So other than that, I endorse this investigation and would like to see it go on to the board and the staff deal with it appropriately.
Great, thanks. Thanks for that. So yeah, I do myself. Any other people jumping in? Okay. Do have a couple of things I'd like to follow up just on recommendation number 5, and apologies, I did not give anyone a heads up from this. I'm just curious just as we went through the presentation, it says that the recommendation is to do the reviews of sole source awards semi-annually. Is that a best practice? I'm just curious where the twice a year came from and why it's that as opposed to 4 times a year or once a year.
In my experience, Chair, a lot of these reports come annually, and I thought, given the concerns, it's probably best right now to do it semi-annual, so it's in front of you on a more regular cadence. That was where the semi-annual came from.
Okay, great. I just think the other thing, again, then relative for staff as the board considers this in the future, I'm fine with that, but it might be useful to know over the past few years how many sole source contract awards we've been doing. And so is that semi-annually the right cadence? Because if we do a ton of them, maybe it should be more often. If we're doing 1 a year, then semi-annually it might be overkill, but just a comment. But I'm fine sending the recommendation for it as is. The other question I had was, again, when this first came up, there was a lot of public input about, well, we also need to look at the 15 and the fast track lanes on the 15, and just my looking at the report, I'm looking at the recommendations around controls in the finance office. That it clearly applies to both. I see recommendations around syncing with the Klipsch data and the back office on a more frequent basis and checking. That seems like that would apply to both roads. And so is it fair to say that the vast majority of these recommendations, or the majority of the recommendations and findings, probably apply to both and will address likely issues in I-15 as well, corridor?
It is fair to say that.
Okay, thanks. And I think, we can dig into that a little bit more. But, as we come up with the annual, I noticed, for example, you do have a recommendation in here to add something to the work plan for the audit next year. And that wasn't one of them. So I think right now we're probably feeling comfortable that this will cover both the 125 and 15 adequately. And we don't need to do any more work around the 15 fast track lane, correct?
I concur with that.
Great, thanks. And then I guess a question for staff. We did authorize a sole source contract going forward. There were a lot of findings in here with respect to concerns around how the requirements process and perhaps the RFP process went with the last time, and things like inconsistent requirements and not clear requirements and all that kind of stuff. Where are we at with respect to defining those things with the new sole source contract at this point?
The
Statement of work and all that kind
Sorry,
of
do you
stuff.
want to? No, you can go ahead. You can go. You say. So the new sole source contract, which is with Deloitte and using a system called A to B, the A to B system is a going concern. It is a system that is used in Europe. It's a very advanced tolling system that has all of this all the functionality that we need already proven on 2,000 miles of roadway. And so what we're doing this time, which is significantly different than the last time. The last time what we did is we wrote requirements in terms of what we needed, and we went out and asked vendors if they could fulfill this. This time we talked to 6 different vendors. We selected this one because the system that they had the type of functionality that we needed. And so what we're doing is mapping. Instead of us coming up with requirements and having the vendor build something, we're taking the system that the vendor has and we're adjusting our processes to make it work for our tolling system. And it's much larger in terms of its sophistication than what we currently have. And so they do everything that we need. And it's a little bit of a different process, but if you think about it in terms of, like, instead of writing requirements for a spreadsheet that I might need for accounting purposes, what I'm doing is I'm buying Excel and I'm going to customize the work I do to match the way that Excel works, if that makes sense. So we're mapping it into Deloitte. So we know what our specifications are, and right now we're in that requirements gathering matching phase. And from that, then we'll move forward and implement the new system.
May I add to that? You did a fantastic job. I wanted to we're so excited about this because we're working on this all the time, if you can't tell. But one of the things that I wanted to mention is we looked thoroughly at the shortcomings in the contract that we had with ETAN. Things like who owns the data at the end of the day. That's been a challenge for us. We made sure in this contract that we addressed that. We made sure that we talked to users of this exact same system that we're adopting. And with the last processor, it sounds like there may have not been as thorough sort of reference checks. We actually we sent our experts, 2 people, to go to Portugal, use the system, meet with the customers there to fully understand and see how this could be brought here. So I think more than ever, we're extremely sensitive to the issues that came up in the selection process the last time to try to do our best to address those. And the 2 people we sent were Ray, who's an expert in software, and Lucinda, who's an expert in tolling. She's a nationally known expert in toll roads. You take her to a conference, everybody knows her. So I feel like we sent 2 extremely qualified people to go and experience the system and ask all those tough questions. So I think those are some of the things that we're getting at to make sure that we've got a really solid contract going forward.
Great, that's very helpful. Yeah, just following up a little bit, I do think that given the issues that were raised, and this was clearly one of the key foundational aspects, which it appears that both you and Ray are very clear about, aspects that caused a lot of the problems that we had, that, we look at the 4 bullet points that the OIPA office had in the presentation about challenges with the last process, including like vague, duplicative, contradictory requirements and that kind of stuff. I would be inclined to at least ask that one of the things that we consider is that you have a conscious effort, which probably has already been done, to review that those issues aren't going to exist in the next process. And that, including one of the things to point out was the horrible lack of documentation, but it sounds like you've already got that, and just can confirm that with the board saying, hey, we've gone through all of this. We know these systems are not going to, our requirements are very clear. We did make sure that, that we went through and double checked all of that. And we know that we're going to be clear about what we need and how it's going to apply. Does that sound reasonable that we can go ahead and do that if asked?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Then I don't know if the audit committee would be interested in making that as part of a suggestion going forward. Sorry, Ray, did you want to say something else?
Oh, no, I just wanted to make a note that our contracting process and our procurement process has significantly been redone since this particular contract was signed. Again, this was signed in 2015, I think, and it was actually, we started working on it in 2016. So there's been a tremendous amount of change in our contracting process, and we couldn't sign a contract like this again with the new process that we have. But
Great, even better. Any other comments, questions, thoughts? I mean, so it sounds like, you know, from what I've heard, although David, you may have to elaborate a little bit, that we're all aligned with the recommendations and we would support them. We would like to see them moved on. Additionally, from the person, and these are the OIPA office recommendations, as I said, additionally, from the perspective of the audit committee, I definitely like to say that we recommend that staff continues on with their work about digging into the customer account side of the, you know, possible deviations and confirming that that's all good. I'd also, again, like to recommend that they validate and, you know, maybe when they bring back the discussion around why we didn't get an RFP, at the same time they can validate and discuss why we aren't going to see all the same issues in the contract process that we had this time as part of that discussion as well. And so from audit committee, I'd like to see those two things added. Anybody else have any suggestions or thoughts? Yes, Ms. Pickney Forrest.
I think the only addition would be the considerations in regards to the changes in the recommendation that both Daves recommended earlier.
Yeah, can you elaborate on that, David?
I'm not sure that it belongs in this recommendation per se, because this is specifically about this system. My recommendation is that the board have a policy in the future that staff reports on any multi-million-dollar project, whether it's failing or not, and gives some type of report on that. It, you know, it doesn't fall out of this, so that's why I'm a little bit worried.
Well, that sounds good. So it sounds like that would be a third audit. So we're adopting the. Okay. Sending forward the 10 as is, but then possibly adopting a third audit committee recommendation that actually all multi-million or large dollar contracts have some type of annual update or report or just status indicator of how they're going is what I think I hear you saying.
I would agree.
Okay. Are we all clear with that? And if so, somebody interested in making a motion along those lines with the 10 recommendations from the OIPA's office and the 3 from.
I agree with that.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, I just want to hear from Colleen and Ray, because I assume SANDAG is such a big $1.3 billion. You probably have a lot of multi-million-dollar contract. I mean, what's the reasonable threshold to?
I think
reporting.
Good.
Yeah. So this is something that the SANDAG board has been talking about. How do you keep us apprised of if big projects are delayed? And so we're working right now internally on what we think might be a good policy. We haven't landed on anything in particular. Maybe we identify what the board considers to be the big projects, but as a way to keep them regularly informed. So whether it's $1 million project or a $10 million project, we'll come up with some recommendations just based on kind of a look at what we have, say, in next fiscal year's budget.
Yeah, and I think we could be comfortable leaving it up to the board to decide what the right threshold is, correct? But the point is that this is not just an update on which projects are delayed. What's a threshold? So you actually consciously know that everything's been looked at, that this one isn't delayed, right? So you're actually bringing both forward, okay? So Amberlyn, do you have that captured, or would you like me to try to restate anything about our 3 recommendations? The 10 and the list are pretty well written down, right?
I'm happy to restate what I believe to be the most.
Okay, go ahead.
Actually, no motion is on the floor yet, but what the
Right.
recommendation would be to move forward the investigation report with the 10 recommendations cited therein, with the addition of 3 recommendations of the audit committee, which would be to continue to work on continue the work into confirming customer account accuracy, validate how and why management will ensure that we won't see the same issues in the future. And then work towards developing a policy to report on large projects that are not specific to delayed projects only.
Okay, yeah. And the second one I would just say is, in this case, is specific to the Deloitte, what's the other company? A to B contract. So it's specific to that, and just making sure that we've looked at the exact issues were encountered here and report back out on it. So that is anybody interested in making that motion?
I will move that.
Moved by Drucker,
I second.
second by Pigney Force. So please vote. Once the voting screen's up, there we go. And that motion passes unanimously. And thank you again for the great work by the team, and particularly the timely work. So it was nice to get it done on time. Appreciate it. So now we will move on, take a step back to item 4, and which is rediscussion of a number of things before we open it up. Well, to public comment, I will just note that since we didn't have everybody present last time, that at the last meeting, we did give an update that, I'm sorry, what?
Can I just ask everybody wish Doug a happy birthday as he
Oh.
walks out?
Oh,
Happy birthday,
Doug.
Doug.
Happy birthday, Doug.
are we letting him leave early? Happy birthday, Doug.
You know how to party, dude. So yeah, anyway, so yes. With that, we're going to again move back to item 4. And I just wanted to note, since not everybody was able to be present here last time, that we did, the auditor gave her updates on her recommendations. We did adopt the primary one, which was to include an independent financial person as part of the selection committee, which has been the practice to date. Our earlier recommendation didn't have that. We kind of pulled that back in. And then on item 4 at the last meeting, we did approve and recommend unanimously to send forward all of the changes with the exception of 2.4. And so everything except for 2.4 at this point has been approved. And that would be the primary focus of the discussion today, but we can of course expand it as desired by the members. First, given that context, let's start out with public comment.
I have one public commenter, the original draw. Please go ahead.
It's interesting that you're not even having any kind of, like a presentation for the public, because I think that's important. But I did want to ask, it's just interesting with the FBI coming to SANDAG offices, questioning the contracts and the financing staff last week. I'm just wondering if people on this board actually are aware of that, and just not focusing on Andre, who's the biggest problem, is interesting. And more needs to be done on the 15, because it seems that you're like diverting attention to other things, and that's a problem. But I do think that it's good with this board policy that you are, changing the way that even just the members can be on this board, as far as, who decides who's on the board. Because when you have people who are like the chair of the board of directors deciding all of these things, especially when they're protecting somebody like Andre, who is, I don't know if he's still in the room or whatnot, but it's interesting that he's kind of like hiding away from, the attention, because, he should be the focus of this, and he should be fired or just resign. It would be great if you would do that, Andre. But having independent, and that's the thing, it's sad to have independent people come in from the outside, because you can't hire staff that is, competent to do their job. So then you have to hire outside people to come in. But if you hired people that were actually competent in their abilities to do what you guys needed to have be done, then we wouldn't have to have all of these independent outside sources coming in and helping out SANDAG. But it just shows how corruption is just like it has taken over this entity, and it couldn't be more important to be more and more transparent with the people. So I do appreciate what you guys are doing to try and do that, but it's sad that it takes, kind of a whistleblower to bring forward information that needs to be addressed.
Your time expired, and I do have one further public commenter. Samsung SMA037U. Please go ahead.
Oh, just ditto to everything the original draw just said.
And that concludes the public comments.
Great, thanks for that. So yeah, I will just address the initial statement from the public comment and apologize we don't have a presentation. Given I think this is probably the fifth time the committee's talked about it, I guess we may have slacked off a little bit from the presentation side about it, and it is going to be pretty focused today. So just furthering on, as I said last time, we did approve sending forward all of the other changes to the executive committee as a request, except for 2.4. We had some discussion around 2.4. I think one of the biggest challenges and one of the reasons we waited on this was we wanted to have all the committee members present so we could get everybody's input on that, because there was a lot of discussion around it. Just to provide the context a little bit that I provided last time, one of the reasons I wanted a little bit of additional discussion is because I suspect we're going to have challenges getting that one adopted. And so the question is, do we want to suggest something different and still get part of what we're looking for there or not? A couple of things when we asked, or when Ms. Ruby was asked for her opinion on what this policy looks like and to give her input, which she did. She had evaluated several other agencies and their audit committees, and then because of the discussion around 2.4, one of the things I asked her to do was to follow up and see how those agencies selected the chair of the audit committee there. And I can say, from the perspective of the ones that were looked at, including the two regional ones, which are all regional, but including the ones in San Diego, in 100% of the instances, the chair is picked by the governing body or by policy to be one of the governing body members, and that's just how it is. That combined with the fact that we are a policy advisory committee. All of the other policy advisory committees in SANDAG do have the chair picked in this manner as well. Just makes me think we may not have much success there. So, the question is, we can go in as is and see what happens, or we can make a different request that might be more palatable to the governing body, and we'll see. A couple examples, maybe the vice chair, we go in and ask, can the vice chair be selected by this group, or can we reduce the term from 2 years to 1 year? So there's a possibility to cycle more frequently. And I'm certainly open for discussion, and we'll talk to the board about anything that comes out of this committee in full transparency. But I just want to make sure that we have an opportunity to understand. Usually in these types of things, if we go in with a request, it tends up to be all or nothing, and that's a lot of the way that these things are handled. So, looking for input and potential motion. Anybody care to start? I guess I can summarize in case people want to correct me. From our discussion from last time, I believe what I took away from that discussion, and one of the reasons we waited, was Ms. Wong Nickerson was very advocating strongly for keeping it with our current recommendation and asking that this committee be able to pick its own chair and vice chair. What I kind of took away from committee member Dorsey's discussion was that she thought that the chair or vice chair should be a member of the board, but that this committee should pick it, then based upon the way that you were talking. So we should get to pick it, but it should be dictated to be one of the members of the board. And so that's what I took away. I think, I would let David speak for himself. We were both advocating that perhaps the chair be left alone, and then the vice chair could be picked by the committee instead. But those are just some thoughts.
And then just for context, I see that the edit was from every 2 years to a term of 1 year. Any context regarding that change, please?
Oh, that was just what exists in 2.4 came out of the original last go around of the audit committee recommendation. That hasn't changed. And the context around being 1 year is simply particularly was just from the perspective of if this committee were selecting it, it might make it more flexible because people may not have 2 years left on their term or that kind of issue that they could do a 2-year term. And it just thought it made it more flexible. But I don't know that there's anyone who, the curious is what do we think about it, and does anybody have a strong opinion about it? Clearly, the advantage of having a 1-year term is if it doesn't really look like it's working out, and easier to make a change. 2-year term it does take a little bit of time to grow into the position, and so there's a benefit to a 2-year term because you'll get the benefit of the experience of someone having done it for a longer period of time.
So I want to make a couple comments. I do think, first of all, I want to make it very clear, and I said that this last time, we are very fortunate right now. We have Dave. He's a very great chair for the audit committee. He understands audit and has been a great leader for this committee. But I think that was kind of, I think we got lucky, right? And because whoever's on this committee, meaning from the board or the board members or your alternate to the board members, right? So, and the chair of the board, Nora is great, but she doesn't really know the public members. And I do think that SANDAG has a very actually vigorous requirement about who can be on the audit committee compared to a lot of places that I've seen. So all of us here have a lot of background in audit or financial reporting, that type of things. That's why I think SANDAG should empower this committee that, pick their chair, pick their leader, because especially, this is not I think OIPA is still a very young, kind of in infancy as SANDAG, right? And I do think it's a bit different when it's in a very mature state. I actually don't worry so much about who is the chair of the audit committee. But right now, I feel like, it's still growing. You need all the support you can get, and let's entrust and empower this committee to, pick the chair. So that's really where I'm coming from. I'm fine with the 1 year. I agree that it might take more than 1 year to grow into it. And my guess is most of the public members don't particularly want to volunteer to be the chair. I think it only happens when we have issues with, so that's.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
And I do want to emphasize your point because there actually is something else unique about the audit committee with respect to the board members. It is the only policy advisory committee that requires 3 years experience on the board before you can even be assigned to this committee. And I think that's in part an acknowledgement of the importance of knowing how SANDAG works, and as well as the importance of knowing how board and board leadership works in order to be on this committee. So, one of the things to think about is I very much respect your viewpoints, Ms. Wong-Nickerson. I'm happy you're contributing them. You've been a great public member. But, part of what is important for the chair of this committee is to have a really good working relationship with the board and a really good working relationship with leadership and know how that works. And I think that's one of the benefit of the 3 years experience on the board that gets you as well. So, so I guess, one of the, potential, relative to at least what I believe Ms. Dorsey's opinion was, one of the potential compromise positions would be that maybe we just say that the chair and vice chair are selected by this committee, but the chair must be a board member, which was her opinion. And that could be a different recommendation that we send for. We might have more success with. I think you get at least 2 people to pick from, right? So anyway, yes.
And I think the term should be longer than 1 year because 1 year goes really quick. It should be, I think.
I don't know, recently it seems to take a long time. I'm just kidding. I agree with you.
It's really short. I mean.
Yes, okay, thanks. Ms. Wong Nickerson, did you want to say more? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm also wondering, you know, are there any other alternatives that, for example, you know, maybe this committee elect the chair, but subject to the board's approval, something like that.
That's an option too, as I said. Other thoughts, comments?
So just for, because I was the absent member last time. So just for clarity, as it's currently written, any scenario, one of the five of us could be chosen as the audit chair or vice chair, correct? Okay.
Correct.
So that's the proposal. So then the alternative would be, since the requirement is that board members have at least 3 years to be on this committee, there's at least 2 board members. We would then, amongst ourselves, given the 2 board members that are on the committee, vote between those 2 members in regards to who is the chair and the vice chair. Is that?
That was my most recent suggestion as a possible way to change this. Yes, this committee selects it, but the chair should be between the 2 board members. The vice chair, I think we could potentially open it up to all 5.
Okay.
And see, I don't get to decide this. I'm just we're saying these are recommendations we're going to make. Ultimately, the board decides because this is a board policy, right? What it looks like.
Okay, because my thought was probably the latter one, which would be, you know, if the board chooses the chair, but then this committee potentially chooses the vice chair as a potential option. Is it possible to present more than one option to the board at large, or are we wanting to go in with a unified front saying this is the one that we're choosing together?
My guess is, again, you can do whatever you want, but it's hard to keep, it's best to keep focus, right? If you want something, you should go for what you want. If you give the board a whole bunch of options, it very easily can just go south and they're just not going to not pick any of them, right? That's just how it tends to be. So, and again, for clarity, do you have an opinion on 1 year versus 2 year? Okay.
Sorry, I don't. 1 year, you get more rotation. 2 years, you get stability. Either can have a pro and a con.
Yeah, and keep in mind when the 1 year recommendation was made, I don't know, I go back and forth on this. When the 1 year recommendation was made, there was no stipulation that it had to change, right? And probably the ideal would be that the goal would be at least 2 years, but you could change it 1 year if you wanted to. That was that. So I don't know. David, do you have a thought before we try to put a motion together here?
My thought is that we've discussed this way too much.
Yeah.
And,
Okay.
you know, let's just, you know, I think we need to put a stake in the ground at this point. And as said before last time, I would defer to the public members as to what they want. And what you 3 would like, you know, Dave will go.
I'll go advocate for it, but I can't.
Advocate. So I'm more, you know, whatever you 3 would like, I think that's the important thing at this point.
So I think the end result of this is that we'll likely wait for one of you to make a motion and hopefully be out of here before dinner, but and see what we can accomplish. But I like where you were going, Ms. Pickney Forrest. I don't know if you would be interested in making a motion. She doesn't have one yet.
Oh, this is not being
Sorry.
recorded. If you could
So-
please use your microphone.
Sorry. So because there's a requirement regarding which board members can be on the board, we would then, between the 2 who are present, choose the chair. We would vote for the chair and the vice chair. between the two who were placed on this
You
committee.
mean the requirement that they need to be
3 years.
3 years on the board to be here? So
Correct.
that's the current board policy.
Correct.
Mhm.
Okay, so if you were to phrase that as a motion, let me stipulate that what we would be doing is changing section 2.4 to say that the committee will vote to elect the chair and the vice chair. The chair shall be one of the two board members appointed by the chair of the board. The term shall be 1 year. Does that sound like what you just said? The vice chair can be any of the 5.
Yes.
Okay. So is that your motion?
Yes.
And do I have a second?
I second.
Great. Let's vote. Motion passes with member Wong Nickerson voting no. Okay, so I will take that the next opportunity I have to the executive committee when they let me on and let you know how it goes. With that, we are done with the regular agenda. I will note that we have canceled the audit committee that was scheduled for April 5th, since that's just a little bit over a week away. So our next regularly scheduled meeting will be May 3rd at 9 a.m. And with that, this meeting's adjourned. And thank you again, once again, for taking in this special meeting. Appreciate it.